Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Horizons debate, a special offshoot of Horizons, the Journal of International Relations and Sustainable Development that has been running for about 10 years, over which we have been enormously privileged to feature the views of top global thinkers, global leaders, heads of states, government, international organizations, and many others. Horizons is an independent and uncensored platform that has its mission to enhance the frank and open exchange of views by people who have to say in their field what they have to say, people that do not necessarily agree on each and every topic, and therefore, unlike many other platforms that deal with global affairs, isn't an echo chamber. We are, as a matter of fact, rejoicing in confronting views in a civilized and intellectual way, trying to foster exchange and to improve the global understanding that has been in an increasing deficit in the last years. Amongst the phenomenal authors, over 500 of them that we have had in the past 10 years, we did have both of our guests, our debaters of today. They are, by any measure, two of the world's leading intellectuals with amazing biographies that have left a very tangible footprint on the global debate in the last several decades. The first one is Jacques Attali, a French and European elder statesman and thinker, the founding father and the first president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the advisor to several presidents of the French Fifth Republic, as well as to Secretary General of the United Nations, author of dozens of books and publications that have left a very deep footprint on the global debate. The other is Professor Jeffrey Sachs, my mentor at Harvard. He was also my advisor when I had the privilege to be the president of the UN General Assembly, a professor at Columbia University, the founder of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, and one of the truly beautiful minds of the world, an outspoken intellectual, a guy that, it's maybe a funny statistic, has 42 honorary doctorates. I've never heard of anyone having 42 honorary doctorates anywhere in the world. He was the advisor of three consecutive Secretary Generals of the United Nations, and also author of numerous books and publications. I could go on forever talking about the background of our debaters, but in the interest of time, I am going to fast forward and to dive directly into the debate. But before I start, I want to say how grateful I am to both Jacques and Jeff, my dear friends, for agreeing to cross views at the Horizons platform, which is, as I said, independent and uncensored platform for the exchange of views and thoughts on all things international. And I'd like to dive into the debate. I'm going to start off by asking you same questions. I'll give you an opportunity to answer to these questions. I'd be grateful if you could do it in 4 to 5 minutes with a 1 minute rebuttal for each and every one of you. And then we're going to proceed into other parts of the debate. But I'm going to start off by asking Jacques, how would you describe the current global order? And if you believe that it is in the state of crisis, how do you explain how this crisis has come about?
Well, first, I'm so happy to see you, Jeremy, and to see Jeffrey. Both of you are good friends for many decades, and I'm happy that Jeremy found an occasion to uh, organize this meeting. And I must also congratulate you for what you have done with Horizon and establish a worldwide recognized intellectual center uh, in the middle of difficult time in your own country. Well, the world is in disorder, but the world has always been in disorder. There is no such thing as a global order. That doesn't exist, never existed. Maybe we may say that during some short period after wars, when there are treaties, people respect treaties, and a kind of semi-order exists, which was the case after the Westphalian Treaty in 1648, or after the First World War, or after the Second World War. But rapidly, things change. It has changed with decolonization in the 60s, and it changed with many other reasons later on. And it's true that a lot of people thought that we would have a global order with a domination of both democracy and market, reinforcing each other. And that was quite a seducing view that all the countries of the world will become democracies and become market economy. They all became market economy, almost all, but not democracies as we know. And today the disorders are enormous and growing because we have a, a growing population worldwide, which is maybe the most important sign, 8 billion going to 9.5. But we have huge climate disorders, not under control at all. And now technological change, creating huge question marks on the future of domination of mankind, on tools or tools dominating mankind. And cherry on the cake, a new geopolitical arrangement. What was easy to understand was when there was Soviet Union and United States and West, and the rest being a kind of large group of poor countries, emerging countries, or poor countries, or underdeveloped countries. But today is much more fragmented. But we may see a kind of new lines appearing, which is an alliance between Russia and United States against China, getting rid of the rest of the world, including Europe and Africa and the rest of the world. Knowing that at the end there are some new powers coming, which are interesting for both the US and China, which are India, which is going to be number one power in the world in the 22nd century, if there is a 22nd century, and Africa, which is also going to be we have not to forget that Africa will be 2.5 billion people in 2050 and 3.8 billion people in 2100, if demographics are correct, which is not sure. And then it's clear that the center of the world is moving to Indian Ocean, where between Middle East and India is going to be a very strong place of power. The Pacific Ocean is going to be very important, and the Atlantic as well as the Western Europe is going to be forgotten by the others. Forgotten, or as it is a very wealthy place, it will be a place where people would like to plunder whatever they can take. The Chinese, the Russians, the Americans would like to plunder Europe, will not accept Europe to become a power in itself, because there are too many powers. There are powers they don't want Europe to see as a power. And then they will either forget Europe and abandon it, or do their best to kill the process of a strong political Europe. And that's, for us in Europe, a very important challenge. Are we going to accept this very simple sentence, we are alone, and act as adults to react, an adult taking care of his own future? Or are we going to give up and split, come back to our own old devils, fight against each other for the great benefits of China, Russia, and the US, and for the worst of the world, because we begin to think that we are a very important power of stabilization for the world. But we have to accept that the US, and it's not linked to Trump, it began by Obama, in my view, are not anymore interested in Europe. They are interested in China and try to have Russia as an ally. And we Europeans have been very slow in understanding that change, which means that there are a lot of unknown things to happen. But this is my view of very difficult challenges: war, climate change, technology transformation, and geopolitical challenges for each of us.
Thank you very much, Jack. Now, Jeff, the same question to you about the global order. How would you describe it? And if it's in crisis, why is it in crisis, in your opinion?
Great. Well, thanks a lot. And how much fun to be together with both of you. And of course, all of us, the three of us, look at these phenomena and share many of the diagnostics and the data which we look at together. But I suppose that I'll highlight a little bit of a different emphasis that doesn't contradict what Jacques has said, but I wouldn't view it in quite the same dynamic. Yes, we are in a time of tremendous transition and transformation. The transformation involves the ecological changes and the technological changes and the demographic changes that Jacques mentioned, and I won't go over them. The transition is fundamentally also a geopolitical transition. Jacques expressed a lot of Europe's angst that it's all alone now in the world. It's going to be picked apart. It's going to be the carcass that the others are going to devour, if I understood him correctly. I think that this is a mood that actually has come about not because this is what's going to happen, but because for 200 of the past 500 years, Europe was clearly in the ascendancy, very exciting from 1500 to 1700. I would say from 1700 to 1900 or 1950, Europe ran the world. And from 1950 to maybe last month, Europe thought it co-ran the world, maybe behind the United States. And now there's a sense of panic. Well, we don't run the world anymore. The U.S. may be our enemy, not even our friend. We're all alone. It's a kind of dramatic change that comes about from a fundamental point, which is for 500 years, from 1500 to 2000, Europe, either by itself, mostly for the first 400 of the years, or together with the United States, during the 20th century, still felt rather dominant. Either the richest part of the world or the imperial part of the world that controlled the rest. And now we're truly in a world in which no one's having that. No one's having Europe lead, certainly. Even that went away already by the end of World War II. And no one's really having the U.S. lead anymore. That's the more recent development. The U.S. is viewed as a lot of, I'll use a technical term, bullshit. That yes, it's powerful, but it's a little bit of a thug. It says we lead, but no one quite wants to follow, and so forth. But I think the fundamental thing that has happened is the age of European or North Atlantic imperialism, which lasted 300 years more or less, is over. It's over for a fundamental reason. Technology, in the end of the day, is shared everywhere. China's rise is certainly the single most powerful geopolitical development of modern times. But as Jacques rightly said, India is right there doing tremendous things. Africa, which is written off or not even mentioned or as a footnote, will be a much, much more important player in the world economy in the decades ahead. You go to any remote African village, people have their smartphones, they're online, they're doing all sorts of things. Doesn't look like so much different from what anyone else does, any other part of the world. And so this kind of convergence of technological capacity, which is by no means complete, because there still is the question of military power. There still is the question of space technology. There still is the question of who has the big AI systems and so on. So I don't want to exaggerate it, but the gap between the major powers and the rest of the world is less, not more. The gap between the United States and Europe and, say, China and Russia, almost gone in effect. And this is profoundly unnerving. I think first to Europe, because Europe already lost its geopolitical lead after two massive wars and had to cede that leadership to the United States. But the US was the partner in NATO, the partner in the free world, the partner in the vision of the world. Europe was rich, happy, prosperous, and felt, at least at the moments that we didn't have direct confrontation with the Soviet Union, relatively safe. Now, what Jacques is expressing is a kind of angst. It's a Trumpist era angst, because we don't know even whether Trump will invade Denmark tomorrow. And by Denmark, I mean Greenland. You would not, I would not discount the fact that at some moment Trump declares Greenland to be the United States. We have military bases there. It would not take much to subdue 50,000 Inuit local population. Maybe they'd stand up and cheer because he'd give, I don't know, $1 million to each of them or something. But in any event, Europe feels this angst. Now, I said I was going to differ because I actually don't think Europe is going to be picked apart. I actually don't think Europe is going to remain 27 quarreling countries that have really characterized Europe, you could say, since 476 AD, when the Western Roman Empire fell, or at least that is the conventional date. And it hasn't been put back together, despite a few dramatic attempts to do so. And it's been quarrels all the way through. But in this world of big powers, my guess is within 10 years, Europe will be a big power. And by that, I mean a stronger union, strategic autonomy, a military, a nuclear deterrence, and not just a seat at the table, but Europe is 450 million people and $20 trillion economy, the highest living standards in the whole world in terms of quality of life. And it won't let itself be picked to pieces in the end, either by Trump or by Putin or by China. Europe will be Europe, and I'm not so fundamentally worried. But it won't lead the world. The United States won't lead the world. I think we're going to have a multipolar world, and I like it.
Thank you.
That's my main point. I like it because the food is better outside the United States, because the culture is diverse, because we actually could get along globally, and because we don't have a fundamental reason for blowing up the world, or the social Darwinist or Nazi or Hitlerite or other view that there's a struggle for survival. that some are going to make it and others are going to go down. So I'm much more of an optimist in this way that, okay, history doesn't prove me right, but the future will, that we could actually get along.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to, I actually did expect a little bit more divergence on the first question. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to shift to the second question where I am going to expect rebuttals by both of you to each other's arguments. And I'm going to dive into the conflict, the war, the hot war that is being fought on the European continent, the war in Ukraine. So I'm going to ask this time Jeff to be the first one to answer the question. When did the conflict in Ukraine start? And why did it start, in your view?
It started in December 1991. It started with the U.S. It continued with the U.S. This is a U.S.-led war. And it started with the fall of the Soviet Union, because when the Soviet Union ended, Jacques was very much a protagonist in those days. I was involved. When the Soviet Union ended, inside the White House, the Pentagon, the CIA, the idea was, well, the U.S. won, and we're now in a unipolar world. And it was the U.S. unipolar world, especially the idea that Russia was a third-rate power now. China was, anyway, rice-growing villages. It was nowhere on the radar screen. That we were now in a world in which the U.S. would call the shots. And a lot of arrogant, nasty, not so clever people have led the United States for the 30 years since then. And they played out this vision. Sometimes it's called the liberal hegemonic order. I find the whole thing ridiculous. I don't know what's liberal about it. I don't know what order is, and I think that hegemony is delusional for the reasons that I said earlier. Sometimes people call it just the unipolar world. That definitely was the idea. Sometimes people call it neocons in the U.S., but the neocons were everybody almost in U.S. foreign policy for almost all of this period, which is every day the American political elite told itself, we're number one. I taught at Harvard, you're almost trained to stand in front of the mirror and say, hey, we're number one. We're number one among the number one. So it's a very arrogant view. But in practice, it was implemented in a specific way, which was NATO enlargement and abandonment of the nuclear arms control framework and regime change. Those were the three ways that it was implemented. NATO enlargement was contrary to the promise given on February 7th, 1990 to Gorbachev that NATO wouldn't move 1 inch eastward. It was a systematic aim adopted by Clinton in 1994, spelled out by Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1997, that NATO would move forever eastward, I'd say all the way to Vladivostok, basically, but including, of course, Ukraine and Georgia, to surround Russia and the Black Sea. And Brzezinski wrote a whole book in 1997 explaining why that was such a pivotal idea and why Russia couldn't resist that NATO enlargement. So that was one part. The second was abandoning the nuclear arms framework, starting with the U.S. walking out of the ABM treaty, anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002, and placing anti-ballistic missile systems, the Aegis systems, in Poland, Romania, and claiming the right to place such systems in Ukraine. And this really was destabilizing because the Russians thought, you know what, they're out for a first strike capacity. And I think the Russians really worried about that and continue to worry about that. And then the third is the U.S. penchant for regime change. U.S. diplomacy is, if you don't like another government, overthrow it. If you don't like another government, subvert it. If you don't like another government, destabilize it. And so that is American foreign policy. It's a loser, in my view. It has led to Syria, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Lebanon, uh, and Netanyahu to this moment is still trying to get the U.S. to go to war with Iran. But that's the idea. Overthrow governments. The U.S. famously overthrew or participated in the overthrow of the Yanukovych government in Ukraine in 2014, which started the violent phase of this war. So to my mind, the war came because we had every opportunity for peace. Jacques established the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in the early 1990s because the world was wide open for peace. And it was. I was there. I was advising Gorbachev. I was advising Yeltsin. I was advising the Polish government. I was advising the Ukraine government. No one was talking about conflict. There was not even a concept that there would be a return to conflict. But the United States was so damn arrogant that it did this. Now, of course, just to conclude, I don't know what Jacques' views on this are, but our press every single day for the last 10 years has said that Putin is an imperialist, expansionist, blah, 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 blah. To my mind, having lived through every day of this, this is nothing but baloney. Putin had nothing like that when he came to power. And I know, and I watched it close up, one by one. The United States couldn't tell the truth at any moment. And that, to my mind, is why we're in the mess that we're in. Trump, by the way, it's the most unlikely thing in the world, but he's telling the truth. He said, we don't need NATO. This isn't for us. We got a big ocean. We don't care. And he's right. This was a game from the U.S. side. By the way, a game, but that's why Brzezinski called it a chessboard, for heaven's sake. They view it as a game. This is one of the worst parts of game theory, that life and death is viewed as a game. I know that's not what the word means. That's what we tell our students, but that's the implication of calling it game theory. For heaven's sake, it's not called life and death theory. It's called game theory. And from the United States perspective, the idea was that we can do things and Russia can't resist. From Russia's perspective, it was life and death. It was existential. It was national security. And if you thought about it, as I did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if one side views it as a game and the other side views it as existential, which one's going to win in the end? Well, the one that views it as existential, because the one that views
we're gonna get to the end game.
Okay, good.
After that, but I can't wait to hear Jacques' view on this one.
Well,
when did it start? And why did it start?
Unfortunately, I will agree with Jeffrey and go further. Agree or not agree. I have to come back to what he said before. Europe is not in a lost situation. The fact that we realize that we have a threat is the condition for moving to a new step. And the fact that we were looking for a path to a European defense is now open. It's a wonderful event. And I do think that Europe has all the chance. If Europe fear the future, and the fear is a condition for going forward, not for giving up, but for going further, we may end up, and I hope we will, with a European defense. And we say defense means a government, because you cannot have a defense without a real government. And Europe will become something like a confederation, or even more than a confederation in the future, with questions about Ukraine and UK, both rational candidates for European Union. You were kind enough to remember that I had the idea to found the European Bank with Russia as a full member, because in my view, Russia is a European country, and I think that the future of Russia is to be member of the European Union, as well as Turkey, by the way. And as you said, one of the big mistakes of the Europeans and the Americans, but not only the Americans, was to rebuff Putin when in Munich he proposed implicitly to open negotiations to join the European Union, because it was said, and it was said even twice. And it was a terrible mistake at that time, and I was among the rare people who said we should not say no to him. Maybe you remember that I invited Gorbachev to the G7 in London against the will of a host of the G7 because I wanted Russia to be part of the G8, and I did that, which was not a very polite move, but I did it because I wanted to. Unfortunately, it ended up by saying no to him, and then the collapse of Soviet Union followed, of that rebuff at the G7 in London in 1992, as far as I remember.
91.
91.
I think it's 92, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, Gorbachev ended in 91. So it was the spring of 91.
91, okay.
Yeah.
And then yes, it was a summit in London in 91. Then therefore, I agree. The question of was it any kind of commitment not to go further? I don't know, because Gorbachev says that there was no such commitment. Now he said that there was no such commitment, but I don't know. The only thing I know, as I was there, is that there was a strong push of the Americans to say that to the Eastern Europe countries, but say, we don't want to enter into the European Union. We don't want that. We want to enter in NATO. The European countries consider European Union as a kind of new Comic-Con, a bureaucracy. They don't want to be in. But the US, for good or bad reason, told them, you should enter into the European Union. And you will not enter NATO if you don't enter in the European Union. Why? In my view, they said that in order to weaken the European Union, because we knew that we should deepen the alliance before enlarging, the union before enlarging. And we knew that we have to do a political union before being 26, 27, 28. We could not do it because the push for entering in it, and it was one of the reasons why I proposed the idea of European Bank in order to postpone the enlargement. It didn't work. But that was and I really think that the Americans were behind this idea of weakening by enlarging the European Union. I hope it will not weaken too much, and that we can continue and move into the direction of a strong Europe. The question of who started, there were so many mistakes. I think the fact of forbidding people to speak Russian. I said on the record at that time that what would have been the reaction of France if the government in Zurich had decided to forbid people in Geneva to speak French. The reaction would not have been so nice. I wouldn't say that we would have invaded Switzerland, but we would not be happy. And then I think a lot of mistakes have been done by both camps. I cannot say that I agree with what you said about the future. I don't know, and I don't know if you know, but the Russians today may have a view to recreate Soviet Union and to recreate the alliance with the Warsaw Pact, taking back Baltic states, taking back Moldavia, by the way, taking back also Kazakhstan, which I think is a target for them, for a lot of reasons. And then Warsaw Pact means Poland, Hungary, and other Romania, etc., etc. That is something that is impossible now because we are part of NATO, and NATO, with or without the US, is in an alliance. And that, if it is the view of Russia, and I don't know if it is the view of Russia, will be unacceptable.
That's fantastic, Jeff. Do you want to?
Yeah, just
do you want to rebut?
Just a few points that I think are interesting to add on to, and then to talk about the future. I was involved in 1991 as an advisor to Gorbachev's economic team something that became called the Grand Bargain. And the idea was that the West would give a lot of financial support to Gorbachev to carry out reforms, both political and economic, and to help stabilize an unstable Soviet Union. So it was just around the time of the London summit. And Jacques, I'll send to you, and Vuk, I'll send to you minutes of a National Security Council meeting that I read for the first time last month that took up the proposal of the Grand Bargain. They were declassified in a Freedom of Information Act. And it's disgusting, in my opinion, what one reads, because
there was the National Security Council of the United States, right?
Yes, NSC of the United States on June 3rd, 1991, chaired by Scowcroft, with James Baker, with Richard Darman, who was a sometime colleague of mine at the Kennedy School, Michael Boskin, who was head of the Office of Management and Budget, and a few of the other U.S. leaders. And here are the minutes of this thing. And it takes up my proposal that I was making together with a few others for this Grand Bargain, and it dismisses it out of hand, arrogantly and ignorantly. But it says, no way we're going to help those people. Why should we do that? We will do the minimum necessary to keep our discussions going. And Darman, who was a part-time professor at the Kennedy School, is the most disgusting in the meeting, and he kind of guides the meeting. And he says, look, we'll come up with a PR package. We don't have to come up with anything substantive, and we don't owe them anything substantive, and we shouldn't fear, if things fall apart, it's not going to be on us. And that turns out to be, and then Michael Boskin, who was head of Office of Management and Budget, said, there's no way the reforms are going to work. And the Yavlinsky plan, this is ridiculous, and so forth. And so it's a typical arrogance of power, but caught in these minutes that are very vivid. And Gorbachev went to London, and it was a disaster because he came back to Moscow empty-handed, and then there was the kidnapping, and that was the end of the Soviet Union, by the way. So basically, I know that my colleagues that continued to be in power afterwards rejected any kind of Western help because their view was, I can't say in polite language the way they would put it, but their view was, we don't care. This is, our job is winning. Our job is at peace, reconstruction, development. But these minutes, which are the first time I've read this, express this totally. In fact, it concludes the meeting by saying we need a PR package. It says Gorbachev is a showman, so we need to give him something, but he's going to come back and continue to ask for more. So we'll give him something now, we'll hold something in reserve, but it's all PR, literally using the word PR. Okay, I just add that as a historical footnote. Because this
is really fascinating what both of you are saying, because you were the protagonists, you were the actual protagonists of these discussions, which didn't end well. And now
I would say Jacques and I were the advisors saying, here's what should be done to build a better world.
Yeah, but this is something that is out there in the institutional memory of the United States. Obviously, it's coming out, and of course in the European Union. But what you guys are saying is in total opposite from the official narrative, let's say, that is prevailing these years in Europe. I'm talking about the highest officials of the European Union, both in Brussels and in the member states. You have von der Leyen as the head of the Commission. You have Kaja Kallas as the External Affairs Commissioner. You have presidents and prime ministers of the European states and the United Kingdom who are framing this conflict with Russia in completely different ways and different colors, and basically saying that there's like a white and black thing, and that there's like an obvious villain, which is Putin and Russia. And
no, but we should not go to black and white in this sense.
But aren't they? Aren't you under the impression, Jacques, that
now the question
official
is not,
European narrative is close to
yeah,
that black and white?
yeah, well, we should, it has to be like that. It has to be like that because we are next door, as well as you, Jeremy. We are next door, and we cannot bet on the fact that the Russians are not planning to invade us. We cannot bet on that.
But
Therefore, we have to move and have our defense. It would be a catastrophe for each of us if Ukraine fell and become a puppet nation for Russia. And we cannot bet.
What do you think? So what do you think about the future? How is this conflict going to end?
I don't know. It's going to end badly if we do not let Ukraine as a means to defend itself, because if we let to have a ceasefire without protection, that will only lead to a next round of action by the invaders. We cannot discard the fact that the Russians want to destroy Ukraine. We cannot discard that.
Oh, yes. Here's where we can disagree now. Okay. Now we're getting into it.
At long last. I was hoping for this.
No. Here's where we're getting into it, because I think we've seen this events, but Jacques said something that I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I will, and then he can clarify or say that's not what I meant. But here's what I observe about European leaders right now. They are full of narrative because they think their job is to poll the public to do something. So I'm in favor, just to be clear, of Europe building its military and building its strategic autonomy. I'm not saying demilitarize, trust. I'm not a dove. I would spend more. I would buy European things, not American things. I would build Europe's technological capacity. I would do what I think in a clumsy way Macron is trying to express, and that is to extend the French nuclear deterrence over Europe and so forth. I would do all those things, but I would not do it by the way that Starmer and Macron are doing it, which is Russia's a mortal threat to us and they're about to invade and so forth. That kind of talk is false and self-fulfilling. And you build a defense as a defense and a deterrence, but not by jacking up the rhetoric to the boiling point. But the European politicians that I know are very weak, very unconvincing, and they think they need to use hyperbole to do what should be done normally. So I would express it as saying, yeah, Europe should be independent, autonomous, secure, nuclear deterrent. We're not afraid of Russia invading us right now. They have spent 3 years and maybe they're almost going to take the Donbass, maybe. But they're not about to invade Paris, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the next 50 years of Europe's role in the world, and it's responsible for us not to depend on the United States, and one needs a military force. Very measured, not threatening, not calling Putin the gravest threat to European security. I don't believe it for a moment. And if the temperature were kept down, the U.S. wouldn't walk away also. The U.S. will walk away from Europe if Europe is warmongering. I'll be the first to say it. If the rhetoric remains as crazy as it's been from Macron and from Starmer, I'd be the first to say in the United States, shit, sorry, but I'd say I'm not defending that crazy continent that wants to go to war with Russia. I don't want nuclear.
No.
Yeah, but that's Macron's rhetoric is
so
irresponsible.
I don't think I have my fair share of the time in this conversation.
Sure.
Let me speak. It's out of question. No European wants to go to war with Russia. As I said, I consider Russia as a friend, as a potential member of the European Union. But we cannot take the risk of letting Russia, led by Putin, as it is today, invade and organize a collapse of Ukraine and go further in Moldavia, Romania, Baltic states. That will be impossible.
I agree.
Well, we cannot take that risk.
No. But just to say, but you
no,
added
no. Let me speak. We cannot take that risk. And in order not to take that risk, we have to say that this is a potential risk. We keep in mind, and this is in the DNA of Europe, but we didn't have this behavior in 1936 when Hitler invaded the Ruhr, a part of Germany, which was demilitarized. And we said nothing. At this moment, there was no German army, and it would have been very easy to get rid of Hitler. And then we don't want to be in the same situation of losing a window of opportunity and begin to react when it is too late. In 1939, it was too late, and the French was invaded. That's the reason why the French are saying we must move and we must act as if this is behind the mind of the Russians to do it. We cannot take the risk. It's a too heavy risk to discard this probability, even if this probability is very low.
Okay. But do you think, Jack, that, like, of course, not discarding this possibility is a very responsible thing to have in mind. But when it comes to rhetoric, if you keep putting it, front and center, don't you think that, as Jeff said, this becomes like a self-fulfilling thing?
No.
It kind of accelerates the adverse action against each other.
Jeff said that simultaneously it's impossible and self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't know when it is impossible, how can it be a self-fulfilling prophecy? But you have to remind that President Macron went to see Putin twice and tried hard to get an agreement, and with zero result.
But I can explain that.
Now we have to take the facts. I agree that sometimes there are some too aggressive statements, even too aggressive statements by Europeans, including myself, against Trump. We have to take care of that. But we are alone. And as alone, the fear is the condition for speed. If we don't have a fear, we will relax. We say, okay, we have time. We can take 20 years to organize a rearmament, and we will never succeed. We will not forget what happened in the 40s.
Okay, this is where we disagree. This is where we practically disagree on a few key things. First, I do not want to instrumentalize fear because it becomes self-fulfilling. If you use fear to break the German budget limit, for example, if you use fear for that, because these are bad politicians and they are simple-minded, in my view, they use fear, and then what they say is we're going to war. We have to prepare for war. War is coming. We're in danger. Okay, this is why I don't want to do this, because there's a basic concept of the security dilemma. The security dilemma says you do things for your defense, but they're misinterpreted as offense by the other, and you end up in a disaster, inadvertent. Now, I had a conversation with the European leader a couple of days ago who said, we talked about the NATO enlargement. I said, this is a huge, huge mistake, the whole NATO enlargement thing. And he said, NATO's not enlarging, Jeff. It's not going to enlarge to Ukraine. I said, why don't you say so publicly? And he said, no, we can't say so publicly. And I said to him, if this is how you think our countries operate, that you say to me something fundamentally different from what you say in public, and you think this is going to...
No question. Jeff, you're wrong. Nobody thinks that Ukraine should join NATO.
Everybody says it every day, Jacques.
No, it's not true.
They do. I could cite 1,000 messages from Stoltenberg, from Rutte, from Starmer, who just said it in a 100-year security agreement with Ukraine, that Ukraine will be part of NATO. These are jerks as far as I'm concerned.
No,
They do say it publicly.
You exaggerate. It's not jerks, it's politics, and we can think it. It's quite respectable. I don't think it is needed as we speak, and I don't think it is on the table, and therefore it's not a question of discussing that.
But Jacques, just to say, we could put 100 statements by European leaders that Ukraine will join NATO from the past year easily. And if you're telling me those are just statements,
that has nothing to do with the question. The question is that
yes, it has to do with the political reality.
No,
what is the intention? If it's all lies, how can politicians stand and lie every day?
Just a second.
They sometimes do. They often do, as a matter of fact.
No, but how dangerous it is. They also get us into wars.
No. Today, Ukraine is fighting with the support of US. And it's enough. It's enough. You said Ukraine resist for 3 years, fine, but would have Ukraine resisted without the support of the West?
There would never have been a war without the U.S. pushing NATO enlargement. Never even a war. So the whole idea.
That's your point.
Can I just interrupt this conversation here and then ask you, as we had discussed previously, because we're coming to an end, unfortunately for me. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope both of you enjoyed too. But I'd like to ask you like a blitz round of questions in which we're not going to get into the detailed explanation. Well, actually, no explanation whatsoever. I'm going to ask you to give a yes or a no answer. And then knowing that it's sometimes impossible to give a yes or a no answer, I'm going to give you a third option to say veto. I mean, France is a veto power in the Security Council. The US is as well, and perhaps US is using the veto more often than France. But I'm going to give you an opportunity to say yes, no, or a veto because it's too complicated. And I'm going to ask you the same questions to all of you. So I'll dive into it right away. Yes, no, or veto. And I'm going to start by Jacques, asking him, in your opinion, is the war in Ukraine the last hot war that is going to be fought in Europe in the next 10 years?
Of course not.
And Jeff? No?
Yes.
Jeff? Yes, that's the last one. So you disagree. Come 2035, Jeff, will there still be the Republic of China, Taiwan?
There will be a republic, but it will be part of a unified China.
So the answer is no. The answer is no. And
well, as an independent country, it's not independent even today.
In which year did you say?
2035.
Or 2035, I think they will be united, but maybe they will be united in a democratic China.
Oh, wow. Now, is the European Union facing an existential crisis, Jacques?
No.
Jeff?
Yes.
Oh, wow. And now another question, which I think...
do you have the same
by the way,
question?
I'm a fan of the European Union, but I think it's
do
facing
you have the same question for the US? Because we can say that US is facing an existential question.
We're going to get to some things related to the US later, but are the United Kingdom and France going to be among the permanent members of the Security Council in 10 years from now, if there is a UN in 10 years from now?
The question is yes, because it's impossible to change it, unfortunately.
Jeff?
I think the European Union will have a permanent seat.
Instead of France and the UK?
Probably, yes.
Will there be new members of the EU by the end of this decade?
Oh, yes.
So in the next 5 years, there are going to be new members of the European Union?
No, Albania, Macedonia, etc., etc.
Jeff?
Yes.
Wow. Now, Jeff, was the NATO 1999 intervention in Kosovo a violation of international law?
Of course.
Jacques?
Without question.
I don't know. I didn't follow the story.
The bombing of Serbia in 1999.
I'm sorry. I didn't follow it.
And Now, Jacques, how about the invasion of Ukraine in 2022? Was that a violation of international law?
By the Russians?
Yes.
Of course, yes.
Jeff?
Yes, but it followed a violation of many violations of international law by the United States. So it was a provoked conflict.
So now, given that both of you are economists, Jeff, I'm going to ask you first: are sanctions, economic sanctions, are they an effective tool of diplomacy, in your opinion?
Well, they are illegal and mostly ineffectual, but they can devastate an economy, but they cannot achieve their political aims.
Jacques?
I always was against sanctions, but if it can help stop the war, I will not be against.
Now, Jacques, is there going to be an independent state of Palestine in your lifetime?
I was fighting for that since 50 years, and I do hope it will happen. But an independent state doesn't mean a United States with only one country. It means two states, not one state solution.
So you believe that you're going to witness an independent state of Palestine?
Two-state solution, not one state solution.
Jeff?
Yes, by the end of this year.
By the end of this year?
Yes.
That is fascinating. Now, come 2050, Jeff, will China be overall the most powerful country in the world?
No.
And Jacques?
No. I just want to remind you a very simple statistic. According to the demographics, there will be no Korea in 4 generations, which means it's the same for China. A huge challenge.
Demographic challenge. Now, I'm going to ask you, Jacques.
By the way, let me just make a footnote. It could be the largest economy, but we will be in a truly multipolar world.
Now, Jacques, I'm going to ask you a very delicate question. Do you consider Emmanuel Macron a successful president of the Fifth Republic?
I cannot answer in one question, in one sentence, but if I have to say yes or no, I say yes.
And Jeffrey?
No.
About Macron? No.
No.
And the last question I'm going to ask you of this type, and I'm going to start with Jeff. Can the European Green Deal be pulled off without a significant technological and financial engagement with China?
No, but it should be pulled off with an engagement with China.
And Jacques?
I hope it will succeed without engagement with China.
Without engagement with China. Well, that's absolutely fascinating. And instead of my just closing simply this debate, I'm going to give you one last shot at asking each other a question, if you have a question for each other. But stay short, and because we need to wrap up the conversation. Jacques, you go first.
It was a great conversation, and I'm happy that we are not far from each other. And I think that we have still time in our life to build the world that we were hoping from the beginning, which is the world of that we dream of in 1989. And I think it's still possible.
So no question for Jeff.
A question for Jeff. A question for Jeff. My question is, do you think that the US can be dismantled because of the difficulties they face now? Dismantled the nation.
It could revert to much more of a confederation because the divisions are large, the consensus is low.
And Jeff, the one parting question for Jacques and your closing statement.
Could European leaders do what needs to be done, but also speak about real peace without panic and engage again respectfully with Russia?
Not for the moment. Unfortunate.
Well, thank you for this time. Thank you for this amazing conversation. I very much hope to see you both very soon in Paris, Jacques, where I teach now at Sciences Po, or in New York, Jeff, where I continue to come to the UN and otherwise. Thank you very much. I
Thank
really
you.
wish that the people who do not see eye to eye on the world stage would be capable of exchanging their views and thoughts in the same way that you did tonight. It was a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much,
Thank you
and
very
I hope
much.
to see you
So
soon.
great to be together. Thank you for bringing us together, Vuk,
Thank
and
you.
great to
And
see you,
Thank
let's
you.
Jacques.
try to find an occasion to have a glass of wine
Absolutely.
in real.
Let's do that. Let's do that.